Ever feel like you're running on a treadmill, pushing harder and harder, but not actually getting anywhere? That's how Earl, a 41-year-old union electrician with 15 years under his belt, felt every single day. His hands, calloused and scarred, were proof of his dedication. He provided for his family. That's what mattered. But something was shifting, and he felt it in the deep lines etched around his eyes and the constant tension in his jaw. Earl's days were a relentless cycle. 4:30 a.m. alarm, out the door by 5:00, 12 hours on a job site, home late. It wasn't just a job. It was a responsibility hammered into him since childhood, watching his own father, a factory worker, come home exhausted but unwavering. His $7,500 a month took care of business. The mortgage, the bills, and slowly chipping away at the $65,000 debt. But was it enough? The overtime was the killer. It was supposed to be temporary, a way to catch up. But it had become a way of life for Earl. His wife, Sarah, barely said anything anymore, and he figured she was happy. He was providing, wasn't he? His son, Leo, and his little girl, Maya, barely looked at him these days. They were growing up so fast. He remembered teaching Leo how to ride his bike. When was the last time he did something like that? He kept telling himself it was for them. Was trading his time for their security. That $32 an hour with overtime was the difference. But somewhere along the line, he'd lost track of what he was working asterisk for. The small 900-square-foot ranch house was a testament to Earl's work ethic. Neat and tidy inside, thanks to Sarah, but the exterior, that needed a new coat of paint. The gutters were overflowing with leaves. He kept meaning to get to it. Weekends were for sleeping, or more overtime. Inside, a photo on the mantelpiece showed Earl and Sarah on their wedding day 14 years ago. They looked so young, so happy. When was the last time he saw Sarah smile like that? He made a mental note to bring her flowers. Again, he forgot their anniversary last year. Sarah just sighed and said, "It's okay, Earl." But it wasn't okay. Not for her. Not for him. His Ford F-150, bought on loan, was his sanctuary. The 20 minutes of silence before and after work were the only times he wasn't thinking about wire gauges, voltage drops, or overtime pay. He'd crank up the classic rock station, close his eyes for a moment, and just breathe. He'd be so close to turning around and driving away, starting over somewhere. But he couldn't. He had responsibilities. He was a provider, wasn't he? At the job site, Earl was a machine. He knew those blueprints inside and out. His calloused hands moved with a practiced grace, stripping wires, connecting circuits, solving problems that baffled younger electricians. He earned respect on every site. They all wanted Earl. He was the guy to call if you needed something done right and fast. He got the job done. But the pride he once felt was fading. It was replaced by a bone-deep weariness, a hollowness that no amount of money could fill. "Hey, Earl, you pulling another double today?" Coworker asked one day. Earl just nodded, not meeting his gaze. Evenings were a blur. He'd come home to the smell of reheated dinners. Sarah would give him a tired smile. "How was your day, Earl?" He'd usually just shrug. "Busy." Leo and Maya would be glued to their screens, barely acknowledging his presence. He'd try to help with homework, but his mind was still buzzing with electrical diagrams. "Dad, you're doing it wrong," Leo would say. Maya would just stare blankly. He'd sigh and walk away. He knew he was failing them. But what could he do? He had to provide. The $40,000 credit card debt weighed on him like a physical burden. "Just a little more overtime," he'd tell himself. "Then we'll be okay." He'd collapse into bed around 10, exhausted but unable to sleep. His mind would race. History documentaries flickered on his phone's screen, the only thing that could quiet the storm inside his head. He'd read about Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius, finding some strange comfort in the ancient wisdom. But even the Stoics couldn't help him escape the crushing weight of his responsibilities. One night, he found Maya had left him a plate of cold spaghetti on the counter. A drawing next to it, the family at dinner. Mom, Leo, Maya, and a sad, empty chair where he should be. The silence of the house echoed in his chest. That's when it hit him. He was working to earn money to spend on a family he was actively abandoning every single day. His presence was more valuable than his presence or his paycheck. He was trading irreplaceable time for replaceable money. The 4:30 a.m. alarm was a daily assault. Earl would drag himself out of bed, the weight of another day pressing down on him before his feet even hit the floor. Sarah would stir beside him, a silent question in her eyes. He'd avoid her gaze, shuffling towards the bathroom, the cold tile shocking him awake. Black coffee, chugged standing at the kitchen counter, was his only fuel. No breakfast, no time. He was out the door by 5:00 a.m., his Ford F-150 a familiar rumble in the pre-dawn darkness. The $25,000 loan on the truck felt like a noose around his neck. 30 minutes on the highway, fighting the urge to drift off, the same route he'd driven for 15 years. The radio was off, just the hum of the engine and the endless miles. He was running on fumes, both physically and mentally. The job site was a cacophony of noise and activity. Earl, the 41-year-old union electrician, blended into the swarm of hard hats and fluorescent vests. He'd clock in at 6:00 a.m., another 12-hour shift stretching before him. Pulling wire, running conduit, troubleshooting faulty panels. His hands, calloused and scarred, moved with practiced efficiency. He was good at his job, damn good. But the satisfaction was fleeting, drowned out by the relentless pressure to keep the project on schedule. Lunch was a hurried affair, a sandwich eaten in the cab of his truck while scrolling through job specs on his phone. He'd steal a few minutes to read his philosophy books, hiding behind a sports app, a secret indulgence that momentarily transported him away from the grind. Marcus Aurelius' words about duty and acceptance resonated with him, but they couldn't erase the image of Maya's drawing, the empty chair at the dinner table. The afternoon dragged on, each hour feeling like an eternity. His back ached, his eyes burned, and his patience wore thin. He snapped at a younger apprentice for a minor mistake, the words sharper than he intended. The guilt gnawed at him. He was becoming his father, the tired, distant provider he had always resented. The overtime was killing him. Finally, 6:00 p.m. arrived. He'd clock out, the relief a temporary reprieve. The drive home was a repeat of the morning, only now the exhaustion was bone deep. He'd pull into his driveway around 7:00 p.m., the small 900-square-foot ranch house a beacon of both comfort and guilt. He knew Sarah and the kids were waiting, but he dreaded facing them. The weight of his absence hung heavy in the air. Evenings were a blur. He'd come home to the smell of reheated dinners. Sarah would give him a tired smile. "How was your day, Earl?" He'd usually just shrug. "Busy." Leo and Maya would be glued to their screens, barely acknowledging his presence. He'd try to help with homework, but his mind was still buzzing with electrical diagrams. "Dad, you're doing it wrong," Leo would say. Maya would just stare blankly. He'd sigh and walk away. He knew he was failing them, but what could he do? He had to provide. The $40,000 credit card debt weighed on him like a physical burden. "Just a little more overtime," he'd tell himself. "Then we'll be okay." He'd collapse into bed around 10, exhausted but unable to sleep. His mind would race. History documentaries flickered on his phone screen, the only thing that could quiet the storm inside his head. He'd read about Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius, finding some strange comfort in the ancient wisdom. But even the Stoics couldn't help him escape the crushing weight of his responsibilities. One night, he found Maya had left him a plate of cold spaghetti on the counter. A drawing next to it, the family at dinner. Mom, Leo, Maya, and a sad, empty chair where he should be. The silence of the house echoed in his chest. That's when it hit him. He was working to earn money to spend on a family he was actively abandoning every single day. His presence was more valuable than his presence or his paycheck. He was trading irreplaceable time for replaceable money. Earl stared at the plate, cold spaghetti congealing under the dim kitchen light. Maya's drawing, crude and heartfelt, a punch to the gut. He picked it up, tracing the stick figures with a calloused finger. Sarah's smiling face, Leo with his goofy grin, Maya's pigtails. Then the empty chair, a black hole in the middle of their lives. He set the drawing down, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He felt a hollowness deep inside, a cold dread he hadn't felt since his father's funeral. It wasn't just guilt, it was a terrifying realization. He wasn't living, he was just working. Earl was 41 years old, a union electrician with 15 years of experience. He was good with his hands, a problem solver. But he couldn't fix this. He couldn't fix the distance between him and Sarah, the way Leo's eyes glazed over when he tried to talk about baseball, the way Maya clung to Sarah's leg when he reached for a hug. He remembered teaching Leo to ride his bike, the pure joy on his son's face. He hadn't seen that joy in years. He remembered Sarah's smile when he paid for Maya's braces in cash. He hadn't seen that smile in a long time either. He looked around the small kitchen, the heart of their 900-square-foot ranch house. They'd worked so hard to get here, but what was the point if he wasn't here? He walked into the living room, empty. He picked up the remote, flipped through channels, then turned the TV off. He walked into the kids' rooms, peeked in. Leo was asleep, sprawled out with his headphones on. Maya was curled up with a stuffed animal, her thumb in her mouth. He tucked the blanket around her, a knot forming in his throat. He hadn't tucked her in weeks. He tiptoed out, closing the door softly. He found Sarah in their bedroom, reading in bed. She looked up, her eyes tired. "You're home late," she said, her voice flat. Yeah, Earl replied. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped in front of him. Maya left you some spaghetti, she said quietly, looking back at her book. He nodded. I saw. Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke. Sarah, I don't want to do this anymore. She closed her book, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Do what, Earl? Work overtime? Or be married to me? The words stung. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in months. He saw the weariness in her face, the lines around her eyes that mirrored his own. Neither, he said softly. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose them. He thought of his own father, always tired, always providing. He didn't want to be that man. His biggest regret was missing Leo's first home run. He couldn't keep missing everything. Then what are you going to do, Earl? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. We have bills to pay. We have $40,000 in credit card debt. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. I don't know, he admitted. But I'll figure it out, I promise. I'm good at figuring things out. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. Just give me a chance. He knew he couldn't keep going at this pace. He was breaking, and he was breaking them. The core lesson hit him hard. His presence was more valuable than his presence or his paycheck. Earl lay awake long after Sarah had fallen asleep. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of a passing car. $40,000 in credit card debt plus the $25,000 truck loan. He felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. Thought of his father, a factory worker, always tired, always providing. That's what he knew. That's what he thought being a man meant. Be like his father, only better. He was doing so much more than his father ever did. Then why did he feel so much less? He tossed and turned. The drawing of the family at dinner with the empty chair burned in his mind. Maya's sad little face, it was a physical ache. He'd missed her recital last month. He'd promised. Another broken promise. Sarah was right to look at him that way. He was so exhausted from work, he forgot their anniversary last year. She only reminded him the next day. He could feel her slipping away. He pictured Leo's face the day he hit his first home run. Earl wasn't there. He was pulling wire on a new construction site. He'd promised to be there, his biggest regret. He tried to imagine what his father would do, what Sarah wanted him to do, what the kids needed him to do. No, that was wrong. What he wanted him to do, that was the real question. Stoicism. He flipped open his phone, scrolling through the passages he'd saved. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, words about duty, about virtue, about living a meaningful life. He'd always hid the app behind the sports scores, afraid someone would think he was getting soft. What was he so afraid of? I am done living like this, he whispered to himself. He got out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah. Walked to the living room, the cool floorboards beneath his feet. He sat in his armchair, the one he never had time to sit in. He looked around at the family photos on the mantelpiece, frozen smiles from birthdays and holidays he barely remembered being present for. He was a provider, yes, but what kind of life was he providing? He thought of teaching Leo how to ride his bike and the pride of seeing him finally balance. His proudest memory. A plan started to form in his mind. It wasn't fully formed, but it was a start. He'd talk to his foreman tomorrow, tell him he couldn't do the overtime anymore. It will be like telling him he was going to grow wings. He was the man you called when you needed something done, no matter the hour. That reputation was his identity. No, he said aloud. That was my prison. His surface goal was to pay off the debt, the deep desire to be a real husband, a real father, not just a checkbook. He wanted to hear his kids' laughter again. He wanted to feel Sarah's hand in his, not just across the kitchen table while they paid bills. He feared that he'd wake up one day and his kids would be grown and gone. He closed his eyes, picturing his secret dream, starting his own small residential electrician business. He could set his own hours, coach Leo's baseball team, fix the gutters, paint the house. He opened his eyes, a flicker of hope in his heart. It was a long shot. A huge risk. He could fail. But what if he didn't? What if he could build a better life, one that wasn't measured in dollars and hours, but in moments and memories? He stood up, a new resolve hardening his gaze. He had a family to save. The next morning, Earl woke before the alarm, a knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach. He'd been running on autopilot for so long, he almost didn't know how to steer. He pictured Sarah's face, the way her eyes used to crinkle at the corners when she laughed. He hadn't seen that genuine joy in years. He had to change. Not just for her, not just for the kids, but for himself. He was 41 years old, a union electrician with 15 years of experience, and he felt like he was living someone else's life. He arrived at the job site, the usual cacophony of construction noise assaulting his ears. He found Foreman Johnson leaning against a stack of lumber, a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Morning, Earl." Johnson grunted, his voice rough from years of smoking. Earl took a breath. "Johnson, can I talk to you for a minute?" The foreman raised an eyebrow, a silent invitation to continue. Earl continued. "I can't do the overtime anymore. I need to cut back, way back." Johnson's face hardened. "What are you talking about, Earl? We're counting on you." "Big push on this project, you know that?" Earl swallowed hard. "I know, but I can't. Family stuff, it's important." Johnson scoffed. "Family stuff? We all got families, Earl. This job is how we take care of them." Earl looked him in the eye. "I understand that, but I'm not really taking care of mine, working all these hours. Not really. I need to be there." He remembered the day he got his journeyman's license, the pride swelling in his chest. He had wanted to be a provider. "Look, Earl, you're one of my best guys. I can't just replace you on this kind of notice." Earl nodded. "I know. I'll finish out the week, help you find someone to cover my shifts, train them up, whatever you need. But after that, I'm done with the overtime." Johnson stared at him, his expression a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. "All right, Earl," he finally said, "but don't expect me to be happy about it." Earl managed a weak smile. "I don't." He was thinking of that day teaching Leo how to ride his bike, the scraped knees and wobbles, but the pure joy on his son's face when he finally got it. The rest of the day was a blur of wires and circuits. Earl worked with a newfound focus, knowing he was working towards something bigger than just a paycheck. During his lunch break, he didn't hide behind his phone, reading philosophy. He called Sarah. "Heh," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Just wanted to see how you and the kids are doing." There was a pause on the other end. "We're fine, Earl," Sarah said, her voice wary. "Is everything okay?" Earl hesitated, then spoke. "Yeah, everything's going to be okay, I promise." That evening, Earl arrived home at 6:00 p.m., the sun still shining. Leo and Maya were playing in the front yard, building a fort out of old blankets and chairs. He paused, just watching them for a moment, drinking in the simple joy of their laughter. They looked up, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "Dad!" Maya shrieked, running towards him and engulfing him in a hug. Leo, trying to act cool, just nodded a greeting. "Hey, Dad," he said, still proud of Earl paying cash for braces. Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. He walked in, the scent of garlic and onions filling the air. "Hey," he said softly. She turned around, a surprised look on her face. "You're home early," she said. He knew she was thinking the same thing. "What's going on?" Earl closed the gap between them and took her hand. It felt rough, calloused, but familiar. "I am," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm here." He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, the first spark of reconnection after a long, cold winter. Earl's chest tightened. It was day 0. The day he stopped existing as a provider-shaped shadow and started becoming a husband and father again. Fear gnawed at him. Could he really change? Could he shake off 15 years of ingrained habits? What if the money wasn't enough? But beneath the fear, a flicker of hope ignited. The image of Maya's drawing, the empty chair, fueled him. He thought of Leo's quiet nod, a silent plea for connection. That night after dinner, a meal eaten together at the same time, a small victory in itself, Earl sat down with Sarah at the kitchen table. The kids were upstairs, doing their homework. He took a deep breath, the scent of leftover spaghetti still lingering in the air. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice low and steady. Sarah looked at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Okay," she said, her voice cautious. He knew she had been burned by empty promises before, by vacations canceled, by birthdays missed. "I'm done with the overtime," he stated. "No more 60, 70-hour weeks." He saw the disbelief in her eyes. "What, but the debt?" she asked, the worry etched on her face. "How are we going to pay off the credit cards, the truck?" Earl ran a hand through his hair, the gray at his temples more prominent under the kitchen light. "We'll figure it out. We'll cut back. We'll sell some stuff. I'll pick up side jobs on the weekends, smaller stuff, residential. But I'm not missing any more dinners. I'm not missing any more school plays. I'm not missing you." He remembered the braces, a proud moment paying cash. But what was the point of having the money if he missed seeing his kids smile? He thought of his own father, a hard worker, always tired, always gone. He didn't want that for his kids. "I want to be there, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I want to be a husband again, not just a paycheck." Tears welled up in her eyes. She reached across the table and took his hand, her grip firm and sure. "I want that too, Earl," she said softly. "I really do." He gripped her hand back, feeling the warmth of her touch. It was a start, a fragile beginning, but it was a start nonetheless. He made a silent promise to himself, to Sarah, to Leo, and to Maya. He would be present. He would be there. He would not let them down again. The next morning, the alarm screamed at 4:30 a.m., a familiar tormentor. Earl slammed the snooze, a reflex honed over years of early mornings. But this time, something felt different. He wasn't facing another day of mindless overtime. He was facing a challenge. Could he really change? Could he break free from the pattern his father had set, the pattern he had followed for so long? He hauled himself out of bed, the aches in his back and knees a constant reminder of the physical toll his job took. He showered, the hot water a temporary balm on his weary muscles. Downstairs, he brewed a pot of coffee, the smell filling the small ranch house. Sarah was already up, packing lunches for Leo and Maya. "Morning," he mumbled, pouring himself a cup. "Morning," she replied, her voice still carrying a hint of cautious optimism. Watched her move around the kitchen, a familiar dance they had performed for years, yet it felt different today. He felt present, aware, not just a shadow passing through. At the job site, the usual chaos reigned. Construction workers yelled, machinery roared, and the foreman, a burly man named Frank, barked orders. Earl's assignment was to wire a new office building, a massive undertaking with tight deadlines. Frank approached him, a clipboard in hand. "Earl, I need you to stay late. We're behind schedule and I need your best guy on it." Earl hesitated, the old instinct to say yes battling with his promise to Sarah. He looked Frank in the eye, his voice firm. "I can't, Frank. I've got family commitments." Frank's face turned red. "Family commitments. We're building a future here, Earl. This overtime is how we all put food on the table." Earl nodded, understanding his point. "I know, Frank, but I need to be home. I'll give you everything I've got during the day, but I can't stay late." Frank grumbled, clearly displeased, but he moved on. The day was brutal. Every wire he pulled, every connection he made was a test of his resolve. His body screamed for him to quit, to give in to the familiar rhythm of exhaustion and overtime. During his lunch break, hiding behind his phone, he opened a Stoicism book. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Marcus Aurelius's words resonated deeply. He wasn't a slave to the job, he had a choice. He thought of Maya's drawing, the empty chair, a stark reminder of his absence. He pictured Leo's face, disappointed when he missed another baseball game. That image fueled him, pushing him through the pain and fatigue. He worked with a renewed focus, his years of experience guiding his hands. He finished his tasks efficiently, refusing to cut corners, refusing to compromise his commitment to quality. At 5:00 p.m., he packed up his tools, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. He had made it. He had resisted the urge to stay, to fall back into his old habits. As he walked to his truck, Frank stopped him. "You leaving already, Earl?" "I'm surprised." Earl met his gaze, a hint of defiance in his eyes. "Yeah, Frank. I've got a family to get home to." Frank smirked. "We'll see how long that lasts. This job doesn't wait for anyone." The drive home was different. The familiar weight of exhaustion was still there, but it was accompanied by a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just driving home to collapse, he was driving home to his family. He rehearsed what he would say to Sarah and the kids, nervous but excited. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw Leo and Maya playing basketball in the front yard. He parked the truck and got out, his calloused hands reaching for them. "Hey, guys!" he shouted, his voice filled with genuine enthusiasm. Leo stopped dribbling, his eyes widening in surprise. Maya ran towards him, jumping into his arms. "Daddy, you're home early." Earl hugged her tight, burying his face in her hair. "I am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised I would be." He looked at Leo, who was still watching him with a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Wanna shoot some hoops, son?" he asked, a smile spreading across his face. Leo grinned. "Yeah." As Earl dribbled down the court, Maya chasing after them, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known existed. He wasn't just an electrician, he was a husband, a father, a man who was finally present. He had a long way to go, but he had taken the first step. He was finally home. His debt was less important than his family. His worth was more than his paycheck. The next few weeks weren't easy. Old habits die hard. Day 12, he almost slipped. Frank, his foreman, dangled a lucrative overtime job in front of him, wiring a new data center. Earl's stomach clenched. The extra cash would have made a serious dent in that $65,000 debt, eased that constant worry nipping at his heels. He imagined Sarah's surprise, the relief washing over her face. Then he pictured Maya's drawing, the empty chair. He shook his head. "Can't do it, Frank." The words felt foreign, like a rusty key finally turning in a long-locked door. Frank scoffed but didn't press. Sarah was wary at first. 14 years of Earl working all hours meant she'd built walls, learned to cope. When he started coming home at a decent hour, helping with dinner, reading to Maya, she watched him with suspicion. One evening, as Earl was clearing the table, she stopped him. "Why, Earl? Why now?" He looked at her, his blue eyes filled with a weariness she hadn't truly seen before. He told her about Maya's drawing, the emptiness he felt. He confessed how he'd been living for a paycheck, not a family. He admitted he was scared, scared of failing them, scared of not being enough. The words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Sarah just nodded, her eyes softening. "I missed you, Earl," she whispered, reaching for his hand. He started small. Day 16, he took Leo to baseball practice. He hadn't seen him play in months. He watched as Leo struggled with his swing, frustration building. Earl remembered teaching Leo to ride his bike, the patience it took, the pure joy when he finally got it. He walked onto the field, ignoring the stares of the other parents. He knelt beside Leo, adjusting his grip, offering simple advice. Leo's face lit up. After practice, Leo said, "Thanks, Dad. You really helped." It was a small thing, but it filled Earl with a warmth he hadn't felt since Leo was a baby. That night, he started working on the treehouse, the one he'd promised the kids 3 summers ago. On day 21, something shifted. He found Sarah in the garden, weeding the flower beds. She looked tired, the lines around her eyes deepened by the sun. He knew she was stressed about their finances. He also knew she felt alone. He knelt beside her, pulling weeds in silence. After a few minutes, she looked at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "You know," she said, "Leo's been talking about how much he's enjoying having you around." He kept weeding, his calloused fingers working the soil. "He's a good kid," Earl said, the gravel in his voice almost gone. "So are you," Sarah whispered, squeezing his hand. The sun felt warm on his back. He wasn't fixing circuits, but he was fixing something far more important. He was finally home. And for the first time in a long time, Earl felt like he was enough. The debt was still there, but it no longer defined him. Day 30, 1 month in, changes visible. Sarah hummed in the kitchen, something she hadn't done in years. Maya stopped hiding when he walked into a room. Leo actually sought him out to talk about baseball. Small victories, but they felt bigger than any overtime check. Earl, 41, still woke at 4:30 a.m., but now he savored the quiet coffee, thinking about the day ahead, not just the wiring diagrams. He even started shaving every morning. The change hadn't gone unnoticed at work. His foreman, Frank, a burly man with a salt and pepper mustache, pulled him aside. "Earl," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Heard you've been turning down overtime." "Everything all right?" Earl met his gaze, the perpetual 3-day stubble gone. "Yeah, Frank, everything's more than all right." Frank just grunted, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Good to hear it, Earl. You earned it." That small acknowledgement felt like another weight lifted. The real test was the debt. The $65,000 still loomed, a constant reminder of lean years and poor choices. But Earl wasn't panicking. He sat down with Sarah, their small ranch house feeling more like a home than a financial burden. He explained his plan. A stricter budget, selling some of his tools he rarely used, maybe even taking on small residential electrical jobs on the side. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and relief. "We can do this, Earl," she said, her voice firm. "Together." The "together" hung in the air, a promise of shared burdens and shared victories. That night, after the kids were asleep, Earl sat on the porch, the cool night air a welcome change from the day's heat. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through the philosophy books he'd been reading during his lunch breaks. Stoicism, he smirked. He'd spent years chasing a paycheck, thinking it was the only way to provide. Now he was learning that true strength wasn't in his calloused hands, but in his presence, in his willingness to be vulnerable, to be a husband and a father, not just a union electrician with 15 years of experience. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally building a life worth living, not just a life worth working for. The stricter budget was brutal. Earl felt a pang of guilt, knowing Sarah had already been cutting corners. No more takeout, fewer trips to the movies, and trading the F-150 for a more economical used truck. It stung, but it was a shared sacrifice. He remembered his father, always tired, always working, but never truly present. He wouldn't repeat that pattern. He'd learned from his regrets, the missed home run, the forgotten anniversary. He surprised Sarah one evening by fixing the leaky faucet she'd been complaining about for months. "When did you learn to do that?" she asked, genuinely surprised. Earl shrugged, a rare smile gracing his lips. "Always been able to tinker," he mumbled. It was a small thing, but it felt good to use his hands for something other than pulling wire. Leo, his son, noticed the change. "Dad, you're actually home," he stated one evening, eyes wide with disbelief. Earl ruffled his hair. "Yeah, buddy, I am." He started attending Leo's baseball practices, offering quiet encouragement from the sidelines. Even volunteered to help coach, dusting off the baseball knowledge he'd almost forgotten. He relived his proud moment of teaching Leo how to ride a bike, only this time on the baseball diamond. One Saturday, Earl surprised Maya by finally finishing the treehouse he'd started 3 summers ago. He dug out his old tools, the ones he hadn't sold, and spent the afternoon hammering and sawing with his daughter. The sound of their laughter filled the yard, a melody that had been missing for far too long. Later that night, tucking Maya into bed, she wrapped her arms around him. "I love you, Daddy," she whispered. It was the sweetest paycheck Earl had ever received. The small residential jobs started trickling in. Word spread quickly that Earl, the union electrician with 15 years of experience, was available for side work. It was tiring, working a full day and then heading to another job, but it was different. He was his own boss, setting his own hours, and most importantly, he was home for dinner. He even started waking up early to make breakfast for the family, a skill he'd almost forgotten he possessed. Sarah would smile, a genuine, unburdened smile as she watched him flip pancakes. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Sarah sat beside him on the porch. "You know," she said softly, "I think I'm starting to fall in love with you all over again." Earl took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Me too, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The debt still loomed, but it felt less like a crushing weight and more like a challenge they would face together. He felt contentment, not just relief. He was present, engaged, and finally, truly home. Earl knew he was on the right path. He was building something real, something that no amount of overtime pay could ever buy. Day 60. Momentum. Everything was clicking. At work, Earl, the 41-year-old union electrician with 15 years of experience, found himself in a different kind of spotlight. He wasn't just the guy who took the worst shifts anymore. He was the problem solver, the mentor. A new apprentice was struggling with a complex wiring diagram, and Earl, remembering his own shaky start years ago, sat with him, patiently explaining each connection. The foreman noticed and clapped him on the back. "Good man, Earl. Glad to have you on the team." The respect felt good, different from the grudging acceptance he'd earned through sheer exhaustion. It was recognition for his skill, his knowledge, not just his willingness to sacrifice everything. Even the union rep, a gruff man named Frank, stopped him in the break room. "Heard you're doing some residential stuff on the side, Earl. Smart move. You got the talent for it." Earl just nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. That evening, Leo came running to meet him as he pulled into the driveway, waving a baseball trophy. "Dad, we won, and I got a hit." Earl felt a surge of pride, a moment he would have missed just months ago. He hoisted Leo onto his shoulders, the trophy clutched tightly in his son's hand. Later at dinner, Maya proudly showed him a drawing she'd made at school, a picture of their family, this time with him at the table. Sarah leaned over and whispered, "She asked me to make sure you were in it this time." His heart swelled. He was present. He was there, and his family noticed. The illusion of security from the constant overtime had been replaced by the solid foundation of his family's love and his renewed sense of purpose. Even the financial pressure seemed to ease slightly. He was managing his time better, quoting jobs fairly, and seeing the money come in steadily, not in frantic bursts fueled by exhaustion. Even got a call from a former colleague, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "Earl, heard you're striking out on your own. Got a client looking for some custom lighting work. Thought of you." The new small business was building slowly. He was present for the estimates, design plans, and doing installations with care. He was becoming the kind of man he'd always secretly hoped to be. He wasn't just chasing dollars, he was building a life. He was making his family proud and himself. Day 87. It hit Earl as he was reconciling the accounts for the month. The numbers danced in front of his eyes, but this time, instead of a feeling of panic, a slow warmth spread through him. He checked it twice, then a third time. He'd done it. With the reduced overtime but the more efficient planning of jobs, the careful budgeting Sarah had helped him with, and a few surprisingly lucrative smaller contracts, they were finally there. He had paid off all of their credit card debt. The $40,000 albatross that had been hanging over their heads for years was finally gone. He didn't shout. He didn't jump up and down. Earl just sat there for a moment, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the small house. He remembered his dad, always stressed about money, always working, never quite catching up. He had broken that cycle. A small smile played on his lips. He found Sarah in the garden, tending to the tomatoes she'd planted. "Sarah," he said, his voice a little rough. She turned, wiping dirt from her brow. He hated small talk. He rarely had the right words. "The credit cards, they're paid." Sarah's eyes widened. "All of them, Earl?" He nodded. A slow smile spread across her face. She reached out and took his hand, her calloused fingers intertwining with his. "I knew you could do it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He finally felt her faith in him, not just as a provider, but as a partner. That night after the kids were asleep, Earl pulled out the old tackle box he hadn't touched in years. Dust motes danced in the single beam of the lamp. He opened it, the familiar scent of oil and hooks filling his senses. Sarah walked in, drawn by the light. "Going fishing?" she asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. "Yeah," Earl said. "Thought I'd take Leo with me. Sunrise tomorrow." He looked up at Sarah, really looked at her, the lines around her eyes, the weariness in her smile. "You want to come?" Her eyes softened. "I haven't been fishing in years." She paused, then added, "I'd love to." Earl felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. It wasn't just about paying off the debt. It was about building something real. He'd been working so hard to provide a life for his family, he'd forgotten to actually